Thursday, Push Excel had a national virtual town hall discussion focusing on school violence and the importance of recognizing it as a national health crisis. Let's take a look at shaping America's education priorities, working towards safer schools.
We're thrilled about the conversations and the research that we are prepared to present to you on this topic so that we may proactively, as an organization, Rainbow Push organization, via Push Excel, proactively engage in some very spirited dialogue, which will lead to policy recommendations for how we can better ensure that America's students are safe. Our collective purpose is for you to be clear that during this national town hall discussion, we will focus on school violence and the importance of recognizing it as a national health crisis. The goal of this session is to identify problem areas, not just locally, but nationwide, and to work towards a solution for eliminating threats to school safety. And so for a point of information, we want to make you aware that at predominantly Black schools, students are more likely to experience a shooting after 4 p.m., typically during an after-school event. And so again, as we began to analyze the research regarding what is happening nationwide, we found it interesting to know that there were some differences by race in which students were, unfortunately, victims of school shootings. What is happening at Black schools and in Black communities is contrary to what is happening at predominantly white schools. What the research tells us, and this research in particular was provided by CNN, meanwhile, school shootings at predominantly white schools often happen in the morning as classes begin or around dismissal times. Unfortunately, the stats don't get any better for us, audience. This article reads 10 years. And again, the resource for this is CNN. 10 years. In 10 years, there were 180 school shootings and 356 victims. One of the, I would say, equally, if not most important things that I found as I engaged with the team in some pretty intense research relevant to this is that there is actually no standard definition for what qualifies as a school shooting in the United States. The reality is that currently there is not a universally accepted database. And so as I began to dig in terms of trying to gain a better understanding of what is meant by this, the first thing that we want you to know is what this means is that the numbers that I presented to you could actually be worse, that those numbers that I presented to you are only actually provided to the extent to which whichever organization is providing that data has decided what their universal definition might be. And in an effort to be intellectually responsible, at the very least, I thought I'd pull some of those definition or criteria. This criteria was established by CNN, again, after they had come to the reality that there were no universal definitions. So I'll just read 2 or 3 of them. One universal criteria for determining a definition, for the lack of a better term, for a school shooting is that the shooting must involve at least one person being shot, not including the shooter. Another one is the shooting must occur on school property, which includes but is not limited to buildings, athletic fields, parking lots, stadiums, and buses. So again, reiterating the point that depending upon the source of information, the universal definition may very well be different. And the numbers that you come across as you begin to conduct your own research may be statistically significant higher than is actually reported. I'd like to also now have our panelists to take just a minute to share with the listening audience a little bit about yourself, and we will dive deep right in. So if I can please start with Ms. Wei Wali, that would be awesome.
Sure thing. Thank you so much, Dr. Sana Whitaker, and it's my pleasure to be here with such an esteemed panel. My name is Wei Hua, and I'm a data reporter at the Marshall Project. We are a nonprofit news organization that focuses on covering the criminal justice system as well as the immigration system. Recently, my colleague and I have published a story where we look at police using force on children with a specific angle of looking at what police interaction with Black girls look like, and how come there are, hundreds of them who experienced police violence in the past couple of years. I'd be happy to add more to the perspective as we discuss more about school violence.
Absolutely, and we're going to look forward to having you share the outcome of your research in this area. I think they'll find it very, very interesting. Dr. Jennifer Norrell, let your voice fill this airway.
Good evening, and thank you, Dr. Sonia Whitaker, for the invitation to participate this evening. I am the proud superintendent of East Aurora School District 131, which is located in Aurora, Illinois. And I have actually been in public education for roughly about 25 years and had the pleasure of serving in various capacities within my tenure in education, from teaching assistant to substitute teacher to classroom teacher, all the way through building and district leadership. And it has been truly a joy. I was born and raised at the south side of Chicago and the south suburbs of Chicago. And I am a proud product of public education myself and a very proud alumna of Hampton University.
Awesome. Wow. Thank you so much for being here. Dr. Michael Allen, right? Shout out to HBCUs.
Thank you. I am a Dr. Michael Allen. I consider myself to be an ambassador for educational change, but mostly my wheelhouse is advocating for and being a voice for vulnerable and marginalized people of all kinds. I've spent most of my adult life, 16 years in public education, serving as a teacher and 14 years as a principal of some sort. More recently, my brother and I, Gilbert Allen, co-authored a book called Brotherly Love, which is a dynamic resource for educators of all kinds, as well as 4th through 8th grade students, and really just breaking down the different components of what equity looks like in action, how to name and hold space for things like systemic racism, and talk about holistic approaches to education. Much of my research over the course of my career has been centered on emotional intelligence, the humanity of people, and really what that looks like in the school setting, and thinking about things like emotional wellness and its appropriateness and timely nature and what we're dealing with in our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Kevin Jenkins, thank you so much for being here.
Good evening, everybody. First, I'd like to say that I am honored to be a part of this panel. I am a proud father of 2 sons, 6 wonderful grandchildren. I was a member of the Aurora Police Department for about 30 and a half years, Aurora, Illinois, not Aurora, Colorado, just to make that clarification. During my time with the Aurora Police Department, I served in many capacities. My specialty has always been working with young people, working with the youth. So I've done everything as part of the first community-oriented policing unit for the city of Aurora, which is the 2nd largest city outside of Chicago. DARE instructor, grade instructor, school resource officer, served in a lot of different capacities. I consider myself a true civil servant. So,
and also, I believe you were the president of the police union there.
Yes, I was.
Okay,
thank you.
Very good. Thank you so very much. And so again, thank you so much to our esteemed panelists. So 27% of the participating audience indicated that they believe that police officers should be placed in school, and an overwhelming 64% of the participating audience believes that police officers should not be placed in schools. Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson.
They should not be in the schools for several reasons. They're not trained as resource officers. They're not trained to communicate at a level that is helpful for students. They're not trained on the street because they shoot body mass. They're not trying to de-escalate. They're not trained. Most of them, I should say, are not trained to de-escalate. And many of our staff and teachers are not properly trained to do crisis intervention and to de-escalate conflicts. And so when you have people in the buildings with guns who are wearing them, you create more trauma than you're going to reduce. Secondly, many of the students in the inner city are in trauma. They're suffering from post-traumatic stress. They live in violent communities. They wake up and go to bed with gunshots daily. And so to ask those children to come into school and take a test at 7:30 in the morning, or to calm down with nothing that has happened in that building to help them de-escalate the stress and trauma that they've already come through is ridiculous. And so, two things: police should not be in the schools. Two, those people in the building have to be trained in crisis intervention. The only people that are trained in most schools are your specialized services people who work with children with special needs. The rest of the children who have needs but have not been diagnosed as mentally and physically handicapped, they don't get the same kind of services and support that children who are classified as EMH, TMH, special needs. You have a whole body of children that are in those buildings as silent time bombs waiting to erupt.
First of all, let's just say this. The question was all schools. Okay, so when we get into words like all and never, that's problematic. So in our city specifically, the inception of the SRO, School Resource Officer Program, really came at the request of the schools who were experiencing different types of events where they felt that they needed an extra layer of protection, if you may, in the school district. So now the issue, though, I agree with Dr. Wilson in some respects, but it's all about who you choose to be in your schools. This is very, very important, that if you need to have an SRO in your building, they need to be properly vetted to make sure that that person that you're putting in that building possesses some of the skills that Dr. Wilson spoke about. You have to have the panel of people who want to know, what has their track record been? What have they done to prepare themselves for this position? Because this is a very, very important position. As an SRO of a high school, you're dealing with young adults, you're dealing with staff, and you have them all under one roof, and it's just you. And when I was an SRO, I felt that was my responsibility to take care of the people and the staff in that building. So does every school need an SRO? Oh, absolutely not. But those who choose to have an SRO, you really need to do your homework. Your school boards, your community members, people need to be involved in that discussion before you bring them on board. You need to know their history. You need to know what has their discipline looked like. You need to know and make sure that they're not just taking this position because it's the last 2-3 years of their career. They just want to coast into the sunset. So there's some due diligence that
Can I ask you a question?
Work that needs to be done. Yes, please.
When I was at CPS, Paul Vallis had an interesting idea, which tended to work. He hired ex-athletes, predominantly male athletes for high schools, and coaches. And he sent them to the schools to be quote unquote SROs. Well, coaches and athletes have a different spirit. And all of the ex-football players and basketball players, they were taller than any of the kids in the building. So there was just their presence sent a different kind of message. But they were not armed people. They communicated differently with the students. And that seemed to have an interesting effect, because as a coach, you are thinking about teaching certain kind of character, behavior, giving students expectations, but it's with a firmness, more like a parent, as opposed to, if you don't do this, I will put you under arrest and take you out of here.
So to that point, Dr. Wilson, absolutely. But there are some coaches you don't want to run our kids either. So
absolutely.
So the people that we're looking for, we had this conversation about our schools and about armed security. I'm absolutely not. No, we need people that are armed with communication skills, with compassion, people that know the community from which they came, and are representative of the demographics in your community. So yes, I mean, it looks, there's all kinds of ways that people can be very, very effective walking the halls in schools, but we just have to vet them properly, and we just have to make sure we have the right people involved.
Ms. Waywali, based on your experience, what would you say are some recommended solutions that we would like our participants, of which are very much interested, they're participating and they're interested in taking away from this some ideas about what they can do? So from your journalist perspective, what can they do to make kids feel safe?
Oh, It's a tough one because I feel like I'm the least qualified to give recommendation among all the esteemed panelists.
And
What
yet
I-
you've heard directly from victims.
That's true. That's true. What I would say is we hear from a lot of parents who try very hard teaching their kids what to do when they're interacting with law enforcement, giving them strategies, don't talk to them when adults is not there, or don't talk back, comply at all cost. Yet it's hard to say how effective it is. Yet we still are talking to these parents precisely because their kids ended up in situations where they're injured by police emotionally, physically. So it's more frustrating. I feel these parents' frustration because they ask us too, what should I have done differently? And what I wanted to say is for all the participants, for all the attendees to be here, on a Wednesday evening, that's doing a lot. That degree of caring, that degree of wanting to make a difference is doing a lot. I don't know if that's constructive, but that's the best I can come up with.
Absolutely. Dr. Allen, I want to pull something out of you real quick here relevant to this question. Much like Dr. Norrell, I know that you've had some extensive training relevant to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know there's a couple of different terminologies that you can use for that. What I'd like for you to do is to share with our listening audience, in your own words, what role can the level of training for which I am trying to describe, which you can probably describe better than me, what role can that play in the creation of teaching environments in which children of color in particular feel more safe?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I guess I do want to start out just because of time. I want to thank you for this space. You and Reverend Jesse Jackson and Dr. Wilson, this is a powerful discussion. It's very timely with everything that's going on in the world. But in terms of directly responding to the question itself, I think we have to understand that the way our current society functions, when you think about equity, inclusion, and not just race, but also gender, sexual orientation, we have prescribed what is safe. And so people who are straight and who fit within a certain binary are accepted in the spaces, all spaces, to a different degree than people who may be gay, who may show up in a different gender than they were assigned. And that means they don't have safety. That means they have to show up the way that we expect for them to show up rather than who they are. So we have to be sure that our schools are centered into a way to where everyone has permission to be their true and authentic self. They don't have to apologize for their language, their origin, their culture, any of the different things that define who they are. And they get to define that, not us. So I think when you think about that, that means that it moves beyond the physical safety piece and moves into, can you as an institution see and have the tools necessary to be able to activate who I am as a person? And I think that's part of what you're going to try to measure when you think about academic outcomes and things of that nature. So it's crucial to what safety looks like in the schoolhouse. And I do think there are implications when you look at most schools who really are improving in certain areas. Oftentimes they haven't figured out simple things like centering wellness. What does it look like to have comprehensive mindfulness, which is a recommendation of mine? And then also the idea of the value of mental health in schools, not just for students, but also for staff members.
Dr. Norrell, along these same lines, again, I'm taking a couple of different angles to pull out of you all. Do you believe that school district have the ability to create safe spaces? And if so, what do you recommend be done in order to do that?
I absolutely believe that, not only believe that they have the ability, but I wholeheartedly believe that we are obligated to do so, to sit in these seats and to take dollars that we earn on the backs of our community and our families. It is our obligation. So, my recommendations are twofold. One, I will just talk about real briefly in loco parentis. In the state of Illinois, in loco parentis means in the absence of their parent, you are their parent. So we need to treat our young people as our own children, whatever we'd want for our own children. And then suddenly we could figure it out. And so for the most part, we have to, as leaders, as district leaders, we have to make sure that anyone that is going to be able to be allowed to stay in our system that we control, that we hold them accountable for that. And the other thing I want to throw out there, which is critically important, and this year, because of the state that our children return to us in schools, this has become something that is critical, and that is we have to change the game as educators. We can't stay in the same box. The children of today are not the children that we were, and not the children of those who taught us, and so on and so forth. And so we have to do something different to engage the young people, because they are not buying it just because they should. And I think that particularly with secondary students, the more involved and engaged that we can make them, and drawing them in, the more resilient they'll become, and the less that they will resort to violence, because being frustrated of being in our little box that's not made to fit them anymore.
Dr. Malvo, do you want to give a few closing remarks?
I want to thank the panelists for being with us. I know the time is tight, so I'll just leave it there. But please, folks, consider ways that you can get parents more involved in their child's education.
And there you have it. We have heard from, thank you so much, Dr. Malvo, wealth of knowledge there. You've heard from each of our panelists throughout our discussion today to give some concrete, comprehensive recommendations for how to move forward. I love the quote, "To know and not to do is really not to know at all," based on, for our participating audience, based on your own areas of expertise and knowledge, as well as based on the expertise and knowledge in the form of recommendations that have been given here. Thank you.